Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very sure we're going to have an amazing time. Okay, so I'll quickly share my screen so that we don't take much time. Okay, okay. So I believe everyone can see my screen.
Yes,
Please
we
look.
can.
All right, great. Okay, so I'll just dive right in. Today we're talking about ISO 22018, one of the most popular standards, right, around the world, globally recognized, internationally recognized standard. Okay, so I know a couple of people here, if not everybody here, must have heard about ISO, and ISO 22000. And you may be wondering, what's all the buzz about? Why is everybody talking about ISO? And for a couple of persons, you may have been, you may have worked in an organization where ISO 22000 has been implemented, and probably you were not the, auditee. However, you had to probably help your manager to, prepare, and all that. So, and you may also be on LinkedIn, and you may have seen a lot of people write about ISO 22000. And so you may be wondering, all this buzz, is it worth it? All this talk, right? Is it worth it? Okay. So, but imagine this. Imagine you have, a restaurant, your favorite restaurant on the island, looking very nice, looking very fly, looking very, very, very good. And then you just, read on Twitter that, or X as it is currently known as, and then you read the news that, oh, someone went to this restaurant, the person ended up in the hospital. So I know you can already imagine how Twitter will be on fire. So I would like to use the language of X. They are going to drag that restaurant, right? And they're going to drag the restaurant heavily. Okay, so apart from that, of course, there's the risk of losing a life because people die from food poisoning all over the world, and so that is why these standards are necessary. All right, that is why these standards are necessary to ensure that wherever you are in any part of the world, you can be sure that there are certain requirements that food businesses can decide to adhere to ensure that any food products that they are selling out there to the public is safe for consumption, right? And then, of course, when you see an establishment that's implemented ISO 22000, it should give you the confidence that the food you are eating, is safe and that you won't end up in the hospital. All right. As a business, you would also be confident that, okay, I know that my business, at least when it comes to the aspect of my business failing because of food safety, I'm safe because you have decided to become certified to ISO 22000. All right. So what is ISO? And I decided to go to the basics so that we can just follow through with that flow. So I know ISO is a very popular word. However, just for knowledge, knowledge sake, ISO is a short form for International Organization for Standardization. It's not International Standardization for Organization because it's not, an English terminology. So it's International Organization for Standardization. Started in 1946. It's an NGO with the headquarters in Switzerland. So basically, ISO comes from the Greek word isos, and it means equal. So remember that earlier I had mentioned that across the world, wherever you are, we want to the standard aims to ensure that everybody is equal in terms of food safety, for example, because ISO 22000 is not the only standard, right? Documented by ISO. There is ISO 9001, 45001, 14001. There are so many standards, right? So the essence is they wanted to ensure that this committee of people, these people who met in 1946, they want to ensure that wherever you go to, everybody can meet the same requirements. Okay, so ISO 22000 is a global standard for food safety management system designed to enable organizations to prevent and control food safety hazards along the food chain. Okay, you can see it says enable organizations, so food organizations, it doesn't matter whether you are a retail outlet, you are into catering, as long as you are in the food chain, right? The standard is designed to help you prevent and control food safety hazards. The first version was published in 2015, and the latest version was published June 2018. So that is why the standard is ISO 22000 2018, the year signifying the last, the last year of review. Okay, and again, ISO 22000 is a food safety management system. So what that means is, of course, just like your body is a system. It's made up of different organs. They all work together to ensure that you're fit, right? The moment one system or one organ shuts down, you can imagine what will happen to the whole of your body. So the same thing when we say food safety management system, we're talking about set of interrelated activities, right, that make up the food safety system. How they work together, how they interrelate, how the inputs and all the inputs from the different departments in an organization, how they come together, the different units in an organization, how they come together, work together to ensure and guarantee food safety, right? So as we go on, we would be discussing about a whole lot of things, and I will still come back to why that word system is very important. It is very important that you take note of the word system, right? So food safety ISO 20000 is not a QA thing, as the popular notion. Everybody thinks it's a QA thing. No, right? You need the inputs of procurement. You need the inputs of warehouse, you need the input of production, maintenance, right? These different departments, they have the requirements they need to fulfill in the standard. So that is why it is a system. It is not an isolated unit department thing. All right. So what are the industries that can implement ISO 22000 2018 requirements? I already mentioned it earlier. It doesn't matter, what industry, as long as you're in the food chain, there are requirements for you. You can implement. It doesn't matter the size of your organization, right? It doesn't matter whether you're few, whether you're many, you can implement ISO 22000. So it applies to all types and sizes of organizations in the food chain, from farm to fork, whether it's hospitality, catering, food manufacturing, agriculture and farming, food packaging, transport and storage, right? You can implement ISO 22000 2018. So now, ISO 22000 2018 standard, what is the structure? Okay, what is the structure of this standard, right? So I always like to say that ISO 2018 standard is a briefing document. That's how I usually like to describe it, right? It's a document, right, that contains different pages, different requirements. Okay, and just like all other standards, the ISO 22000 standard also maintains the 10 clauses structure. Okay, so this is the standard structure for all ISO standards, and ISO 22000 is not an exemption. Now, in the standard, there are 10 clauses. The first three clauses are non-auditable clauses. What do I mean by that? These three clauses give you a good idea about the standard. It explains the standards to you, the scope, the normative references, and the terms and definitions. So if you want to understand this document, right, then you need to go through the scope, normative references, terms and definitions. When you're done reading that, you would be able to decide, is this the right standard for me? Is this the standard I should be implementing? Does this standard align with my organizational goals? Does this standard align with the requirements of this standard? Will it align with my intentions, with the vision, the mission and goals that the organization is trying to achieve? So that is why they are non-auditable. You cannot audit something that is descriptive, something that tells you more about a document. The scope tells you the boundaries of applicability of the standard. Who can apply this standard? And clearly from the name of the standard, it is a food, it applies to food safety organizations. Normative references. What are the references that were, referred to in this standard? Terms and definitions. The standard is so good that there is no room for ambiguity. You cannot guess. There's no guesswork. When they say A, there's a definition for what A means. When the standard says B, there's a definition for what B means. And across organizations, across countries, it doesn't matter where you're implementing the standard. A means A, B means A. So that's the reason why there are terms and definitions. All right. And so, as I said, these first three clauses are not auditable. They are majorly descriptive. They tell us more about the standard. So, where we find the requirements that are auditable and are required to be implemented, are between clause 4 and clause 10. Clause 4, context of the organization. Clause 5, leadership. Clause 6, planning. Clause 7, support. Clause 8, operations. Clause 9, performance evaluation. Clause 10, improvements. And each of these clauses have very specific requirements that must be met, before the organization can say, okay, now we are ISO 22 certified. Okay, before the organization can say, okay, now we can say we have a system that ensures that food safety hazards and food safety risks are properly managed. Okay, and so the first clause we're going to talk about is clause 4. Now, just as Tessie said, we cannot exhaust the standard in an hour 30 minutes. It's impossible. There are a lot of requirements. But what I'm going to try to do is to summarize, what each of these clauses mean, so you can have a general idea as to what they mean. And I don't want you to get overwhelmed, because we may be saying a whole lot of things that may be new to certain people. Don't get overwhelmed. The more you get familiar with the standard, the more you use the standard, the more you familiarize yourself with the requirements, the more you know the standard. Even as a consultant, I can't tell you I can give you all the sentences in the standards, right? But by reason of use, I am familiar with the standard. Same thing applies to you. So don't get scared or overwhelmed. Oh, this is a lot. No, 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 no. The more you use, the more you go through audits, the more you study, make inquiries, read about the standard, the better you become at it, right? Okay. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well, so you don't get overwhelmed. Okay, so clause 4, context of the organization. Basically, this clause tells us what determines the organization's food safety management system. If we say the context of something, what do we mean? Right? So, for example, we're in this webinar. What is the context of this webinar? We are trying to understand ISO 22000 requirements and implementation strategies. That's the context of our conversation. Okay, so when we say context of the organization, what is the organization about? What are the internal and external issues that affect the organization? Who are the interested parties that that the activities of these organizations affect? And who are the interested parties that their activities affect the organization? So, what are their needs and expectations? These interested parties, what do they need? What do they expect from the organization? What does the FSMS cover? What is the scope of the FSMS? What is the boundary of applicability? Remember that earlier I had mentioned scope as clause 1, as a non-auditable clause, and I said it tells us the boundary of applicability for the standard. We know that the standard covers food safety. It doesn't cover occupational health and safety. It doesn't cover environmental management safety, right? Same thing with clause 4. What does the FSMS cover in the organization? What is the scope of the organization? Are we covering all the products, right? Are there parts? Okay, what are they? Can you just to this time? So those are some of the questions that will be answered in clause 4. Okay, so again, the internal and external issues, again, needs and expectations of interested parties, the scope of the FSMS. All right. And another key thing to know in this standard is there are ways by which you can determine your internal and external issues, or the internal and external issues of the organization. One of the most popular methods is the use of SWOT analysis, right? And I'm sure a couple of people will be familiar with SWOT. When you are able to determine what the strengths, the weakness, the opportunities, and the threats that an organization may face, rather, when you're able to recognize these 4 pillars, you would be able to easily recognize your internal and external issues. You'd be able to easily recognize your interested parties. As a matter of fact, you'd be able to recognize the risk associated with that business in terms of food safety. We're still going to talk about risks in clause 6. However, we would see when we get to clause 6 that risks is intertwined with clause 4. So when we say internal and external issues, of course, internal issues can deal with staff competency, internal issues can deal with food safety culture. So how does food safety culture affect the organization? How does staff training affect the organization? External issues can be political, economical, social. There's a tool called the PESTEL tool that you can easily use to identify external issues. You can, research about these tools later. I won't be able to cover it in this webinar, right? So when you're able to identify all this, then definitely you would know all about the organization. So what that means is when I pick up any document that details the context of an organization, I should be able to say a lot about that organization as regards food safety. Remember, this is a food safety management system. So the issues, the needs and expectations, the scope must align with what? food safety. Okay, now the next clause is leadership. What is required from top management? That is what the requirements in this clause tells us. Okay, so what are we expecting top management to do? Okay, the first thing is we expect leadership and commitment. Definitely, before an organization implements ISO 22000, it is not a frontline staff that will just wake up and say, I want to, I want this great organization to implement ISO 22000. It is usually a commitment from top management because it can be, it is capital intensive. It requires some financial resources. And that financial resources will be approved by who? Top management. And so the fact that an organization wants to implement the standard already shows some form of commitment. Okay, so there are requirements that outline the necessary leadership and commitment expected from top management. There are requirements that speak to how the organization would establish and communicate food safety policy. All right, so you get, and you just don't write any kind of policy. You just don't write a policy that you feel is good enough. No, there are requirements in the standard for the nitty gritties, the things that are expected to be seen in a food safety policy. And that is why if you enter certain organizations or if you go to certain organizations, you would see, a food safety policy pasted at their reception, maybe in the boardroom, at strategic locations within the organization, right? It's because the standard requires that having established this food safety policy, you must also communicate it. And one of the ways to do that is by having, this food safety policy printed and hung around the facility. Okay. Another important requirement in this clause is it is expected that the organization would assign FST and FSTL. What do I mean by FST and FSTL? Food safety team and food safety team leader. Again, the standard also itemizes and gives us requirements. What would be the function of the FST? They're all listed there. What would be the function of the FSTL? They're all listed in the standard. All right. And all this must be done by who? Top management. It is their responsibility to assign the FST and the FSTL. All right. And during audits, that is why during audits you see auditors saying, oh, we want to see the appointment letter of the FSTL. We want to see evidences that the FST has been appointed and all that. It's because it is a requirement in the standard. Another important role leadership has to play, and another set of requirements that is specified for top management is they must assign relevant organizational roles and responsibilities. And that is why oftentimes auditors would also request for organogram. Why? That organogram is an evidence that, the organization has assigned roles. Organogram only shows that the organization top management has assigned what? Roles. Job descriptions are what shows that the organization has assigned responsibilities. There's a difference between roles and responsibilities. Okay, and I want to be sure that we understand that. An organogram would show me roles, who is who reports to who. It shows me structure. However, responsibilities would show a job description will show the specific responsibilities for each of those roles. So it is top management's responsibility to ensure that all that has been assigned. Okay, so again, top management, they have a huge role. In fact, you can see top management, they have a full clause. They have certain requirements they alone must meet, of course, with the help of the staff. However, it is their sole responsibility. And that is why it is also expected that the food safety policy must be signed off by top management. You always see food safety policies signed off by the MD, right? Because it is their responsibility. Okay, the next clause would be clause 6 for planning, right? So essentially what this clause, the requirements in this clause, essentially what they detail, ensuring that the intended outcome of the FSMS is consistently achieved. Now, before an organization decides to implement ISO 22000, of course, there is an intended outcome. There's a reason. There is a reason why they want to, implement this standard. There's a reason why this standard is necessary. There's an intended outcome. So how can the organization ensure that it is consistently achieved? One of the sub clauses in this clause is the actions to address risks and opportunities, the objectives of the food safety management systems, and how the organization's plans for changes. Okay, so of course, risks and opportunities, when you're able to identify risks and opportunities, you're taking proactive measures to ensure that certain negative events that can impact food safety do not occur. Again, negative events that can impact food safety. It is very important that the risks and opportunities that are being outlined are specific to food safety. Why? Because it is a food safety management system. Okay, so you are dealing with a food safety management system. The risks and opportunities must align with food safety. Okay, and these actions would include actions that will help to mitigate this. So you have identified, for example, that if there is no sufficient resources, it can affect food safety. PPEs, there will be no resources, for a whole lot of things. There will be no resources to ensure that the facility is complying with food safety, right? So how will the organization mitigate that risk? Okay, so what are the actions that the organization will take to address that risk? In clause 6, we would see requirements of how organizations are expected to address risks and opportunities. Okay, what are the objectives of the FSMS? The standard specifies specific requirements on on how to document objectives. Okay, and the general most popular term is your objectives should be smart. So whatever of the objectives the organization decides to establish, they must be smart, they must be measurable, they must be realistic, right? It is wrong for an organization to set objectives rather that are unrealistic, or they do not risks or objectives that do not apply to their process. Okay, so along the line in this webinar, I'm going to talk about applicability to process, because this is very important when you are implementing. And that is why, even while I'm speaking now, I am always saying specific to food safety, and of course, specific to your process. It will be very wrong for a catering organization to set objectives that don't align with their processes, probably because it was seen online or something, right? Whatever objectives, they must align, of course, with the processes of the decision and the intended outcome for the FSMS. Another sub clause in clause 6 would be, how does the organization plan for changes? So there will be changes that would occur in the system. How would the organization plan for those changes? What are the requirements for how to plan for those changes? You would find those requirements in clause 6. Okay, so of course, for the sake of time, I cannot say the specific requirements, right? I'm just giving a generic overview of the requirements you would see in the ISO 2018 standard. Okay, so how does the organization plan for changes in equipment that can impact food safety? Again, changes that impact food safety. How does the organization plan for it? What are the requirements for how to plan? You just don't wake up as an organization and decide, oh, let us just change our equipment. That is how we feel today. We're changing our equipment. We saw this beautiful equipment looking nice on the internet, so we want to buy it. No. You must ensure that the changes you want to make to the facility, to the organization, to the context of the organization, you must ensure it is properly planned for. Okay, and clause 6 tells us how to go about that. Okay, so again, clause 6 helps to ensure that the intended outcome of the FSMS is consistently achieved. Okay, and if you notice, these 3 sub-clauses, they are proactive requirements, right? They are proactive requirements. They are not reactive. They are requirements that when you fulfill, you should be ready for, you should be able to tackle, major issues that may affect the FSMS if this requirement is properly implemented. Okay, the next clause would be clause 7, support. The support required to meet the organization's food safety goals. So what are the supports that are required? So of course, we have resources. And when we say resources, we're not talking about only money. Of course, I know that for every resource, for some form of money may may have to be spent and all that. However, when we talk about resources, we're also talking about work environment. How do we ensure that the work environment is ideal for the FSMS? How do we ensure that we have sufficient people for the FSMS? Okay, so we must properly the resources for ensuring that the organization meets its food safety goals must be available. And what are the requirements for those resources? You would find them in clause 7. Another subclause is competence. The people that are going to ensure that the FSMS keeps running. Okay, the people that are going to ensure that the FSMS is achieving its intended goals or intended outcomes, are they competent? What is the evidence that we have to show that they are competent? Are they competent by education? Are they competent by experience? Are they competent by training? So either the standard specifies these three methods of showing competence. The person that is in charge of the roles and responsibilities. Remember that we have said earlier under leadership that the organization will assign roles and responsibilities. So these people that have been assigned to these roles and responsibilities, how do we ensure they are competent? Right? So we ensure competence by either education, we ensure competence by either experience, ensure competence by training. Okay, so the standard gives requirements on how organizations can show and ensure competence. And it's not just that, oh, we've trained our staff, we have training certificates to show, we have attendance. That is very good. That is very, very good. However, are you sure that this training, it's really evident in the people? So the standard also gives us requirements that, oh, after training, you must ensure that you are checking the effectiveness of that training. So you see, the standard is very clear. The standard doesn't leave you guessing, right? So the standard gives requirements of how competence can be shown, right, in the organization. Awareness, right? What is the level of food safety awareness? What are the requirements that can show that the people in the organization are aware? Not just even the people in the organization alone, even external parties, such as your suppliers, your contractors, your subcontractors, the people who are coming to the facility. What proof or what are the requirements that you need to fulfill to be sure that these people, they are aware that, oh, we have a food safety policy, we have food safety, we have food safety compliance here, we have food safety goals, we have food safety objectives, right? So how do we ensure that those requirements can be found in clause 7? Communication internally and externally, right? What are the requirements that can help an organization achieve proper communication? Recall that in clause 4, right, we mentioned that you're going to know who your interested parties and stakeholders are. And those are the people that the activities of the organizations impact, and the people that their own activities impact the organization. So how do you communicate to these people? Right? How do you communicate with them? What are the plans for communication? Okay, so what are the plans for communication? So say for example, you're working in a catering setting, right? Of course, you know that there are certain regulatory requirements that you must meet. You know that NAFDAC, they are going to come around to be sure that your facility is neat and all that. So how do you communicate with NAFDAC? What are you going to communicate to them about? The staff internally, what are you going to communicate with? Communicate to them. How are you going to communicate it? When will you communicate it? What will be communicated? So a perfect example would be, we have said that part of the requirements of the standard is that there is a policy, there are objectives, right? So how would this policy and objectives be communicated? We have said that one of the ways it will be communicated is by having it around, hung around, by having even awareness session, training sessions with the staff. So all that would be, readily planned for. How do you intend to communicate with your suppliers? How do you intend to communicate with, contractors? How do you intend to communicate with subcontractors? How do you communicate with visitors? All right, so all this must be properly planned out. And then standard gives us requirements, of course, of how to do it. Another sub requirement, which is very important, and a lot of organizations have issues with this, documented information, right? A lot of organizations usually have issues with this. The standard tells us what to document, right? And how to ensure that our documents are fit for use. Okay, so there are certain requirements in the standard that are specifically mentioned that they must be maintained as documented information. So there's a difference between maintaining documented information and retaining documented information. Okay, so and I would explain what they mean. So for example, you have a business, right? So, for example, we have someone on the call who, someone on the webinar who is who is looking into exporting and all that. Okay, so the standard and you want to implement ISO 22000. The standard has said, oh, you must have food safety policy, and the standard has specified that that policy must be maintained as a documented information. So what that means is you must have your food safety policy documented. You cannot say, oh, we know our food safety policy in our head. No, it must be properly documented and it must be maintained. What that means is if the context of the organization changes, if the information about the export business or the agricultural business rather, if it changes, right, then the policy, it may affect what you've written in your policy. You must go back and review that policy, right? So that's where you are ensuring consumer improvements and you're also maintaining that documented information. So majorly when you have policies, procedures, programs, they are usually maintained as documented information. When you're retaining documented information, it means those are records that change almost every day. For example, in catering, of course, you're expected to monitor your cooking temperature, your hot holding temperature, so you should have records to show that you are actually monitoring these temperatures, right? So, of course, after 5 years, you may not need the information in these records anymore. You may need to discard. So that way, we'd say, oh, you are retaining documented information. You are retaining it for a specified period. And then there are two types of documents that organizations must also ensure that they have. One are the documents that have been required by the standard. Two, the documents that the organization has deemed as necessary for their food safety management system. So there are certain documents that the standard may not essentially say, oh, you must have. However, it is necessary for your FSMS. So for example, that the standard has said that, of course, you must prove competence. So in your catering establishment, right, you have said that, oh, in order to prove competence, we want to ensure that the people we are employing into certain positions, they must have studied food science. So, for example, our quality assurance manager must be a food science person. Okay, so our quality assurance person, for example, must be a food science person. So you decide to develop a procedure for training, a procedure for recruitment, right? While the standard, you will not see where the standard said have a procedure for recruitment, but because you have, for your establishment, you have seen that, oh, we need a procedure to ensure competence. We need a procedure to ensure that the people we are employing, they are fit for the purpose of our organization. They are fit for our food safety management system. What do? You write a procedure, right? So you have determined that that procedure is necessary for your FSMS. Okay, and when an auditor comes to audit your system, they would audit you against that document you have said is necessary for your establishment. However, there are some documents that are mandatory, that the standard has said you must have as documented information, okay, such as the scope of the management system, the policy, the objectives, your management review meetings, which we're going to talk about in class 9. So all those ones, they've been specifically, said in the standard has specifically said these documents, you must have them as the documented information. Another important thing about documented information is your document should not be alien to your process. It should be specific to your business. I don't expect that I will come to a catering business, for example, and I'm seeing documents that align with food manufacturing, or your establishment is implementing or as documented procedures that don't just align at all with you. For example, you're into storage and transport, and then in your procedures you are writing that you process raw materials. Meanwhile, what you only do is you buy, you store, and then you distribute. So how are you saying in your documents that you process raw materials? Where is that coming from? So your documented information must be accurate to your process. It must align with your process. It must be properly controlled. It must be properly stored. It must be easy to retrieve. Right? These are the requirements that we would see in clause 7.5 specifically. Clause 8, now this to me is the heart of the standard. Okay, this is the heart of the standard. Now, for any kind of standard, food safety standard you decide to implement, HACCP is a big deal, right? And I know everyone here knows we're going to talk about ACIP. We can't finish this webinar without talking about ACIP, right? And so the requirements for ACIP, you find them in clause 8. Clause 8 tells you how to control your operations, how to plan, how to control food safety, how to handle emergencies. It says a whole lot. Operational planning and control. So when we say operational planning and control, your SOPs, your SOP means standard operating procedures, all your plans, the programs, right? We have a standard operating procedure for waste management. We have a standard operating procedure for allergen management. We have a standard operating procedure for recruitment. We have a standard operating procedure for procurement. It shows that you have properly planned your operations and that there are controls in place. PRPs, okay, prerequisite programs, right? I will still talk about them much later, so I won't spend much time talking about it now. Clause 8 also gives requirements for traceability, right? How can we ensure that end to end we can trace all the activities going on in the organization? Okay, so what that means is from the start point where you receive your raw materials down to when you ship it out to the customer, you should be able to give proper accounting of all the activities, all the documents, of how that product start, how the raw materials you got it from, the supplier you got it from, what quantity did you get it from, who checked it, what food safety checks did you carry out, down to in process, down to finished goods, down to distribution. We must be able to see that there is proper traceability in the system. So essentially what that means is if there is a recall, right, immediately you can track where was this bought, into what product did this input go into, this raw material, this particular batch, which product did it go into, where did that product go to, right? So the requirements for ensuring a traceable system, you would find that in clause 8. Okay, emergency preparedness. How ready are you if there is an emergency? For example, catering business again. Okay, I think the catering people they are my favorites today. So the catering business again, for example, of course, you'd have freezers, you'd have chillers. If after everybody has gone home, right, something happens to the freezers, something happens to the chillers. What emergency preparedness do you have in place to manage that situation? Right? If there is a fire incident that will compromise the food safety elements of your system, how prepared are you to handle it? So I've seen quite a number of emergency, for example, fire safety drills, and I'm not seeing anything about food safety. That fire safety drill report, it does not fulfill the requirements of clause 8. You have only tried to fulfill the requirements of ISO, 45001. So you need to ensure that even when you're doing a fire drill, you are taking cognizance that, oh, this is a food establishment and the fire may impact the safety of the food. It may impact also the quality of the food, right? So all that must be put in place in emergency preparedness. Of course, the big man in food safety, ASIP, right? Your ASIP and OPRP plan. Your ASIP and OPRP plan, is it tailored to your process or you just saw something online and decided to use it? The hazards that are identified there, are they specific to your process? Right? So, for example, if you're handling chicken, of course, you know that there are certain microorganisms you must mention in your hazard control. If this is not there, then that means you've not done a proper hazard analysis. It means your ASIP plan is not tailored to suit your process. So, what are the requirements for having a proper ASIP plan? You see it in clause 8. So if you are thinking of drawing up your ASIP plan, let's say you don't even have intentions of, your organization has no intention of implementing ISO 22000, or your organization has not implemented ISO 22000, but you want to know how to draw up your ASIP plan, go and read clause 8. Clause 8 will be an eye opener. It will tell you, oh, these are the things that you need to do. Okay, information updates on PRP and hazard control plans. How do you ensure that the changes that may happen in your system that can affect your PRPs, that can affect your hazard control plans, how do you ensure that that information is updated, right? The requirements for verification of PRP and hazard control plan, because verification is a huge deal in food safety. You have to verify that whatever you have put in place, you have to verify that it is working properly. Okay, you have to verify that it is working as planned. Later in this webinar, I hope we have time, we'll look at validation, verification, and monitoring. Okay, so we also have requirements for control of products and process non-conformities. Okay, I need to run now. Clause 9 talks about, how the measuring the performance of the FSMS. What do you monitor? What do you measure? What do you analyze? How do you conduct your internal audits and management reviews? So in clause 9, you see the specific requirements of what should be discussed in the management review. And then, of course, improvement. We can't talk about any ISO standard without talking about improvement, right? Because it's a management system that encourages improvement. It's not that you just, oh, we've implemented ISO 22000 and then everybody goes to sleep. No. So the system must continually improve. Okay, and then I can't finish this webinar without talking about PDCA, right? So PDCA and the 10 clauses. PDCA means plan, do, check, and act. Okay, to explain PDCA, I'll just give a very short illustration because again, I don't have much time. But PDCA again means plan, do, check, and act. Imagine if you want to go on a vacation, right? And then you have planned, the first thing you do is to plan for that vacation. Of course, the next thing you do is to go for the vacation. When you're going for the vacation, you're doing. And then while you're in that vacation, you may notice that, oh, I didn't take enough money. This vacation is boring. I didn't go to the right place. You are checking. What are you checking? You're checking what you're doing against your plan. So meaning you're checking against your plan, right? You're checking your current activities against your plan. So you're seeing areas of deficiencies, areas of non-conformity and all that. And then you're trying to see how by your next trip it will be better. If you implement the corrections from the mistakes you made in this your current trip, then you can say you are acting. So that is the difference between do and act. Do means you are implementing, you're doing what you've planned. Act means you're checking to see how you are implementing improvements based on what you have checked. Okay, I hope you guys got that because I'm speaking quite fast. So the 10 clause plan, do, check, or act. Under plan, we have the context, clause 4, clause 5, clause 6, clause 7. Under do, we have operation, clause 8. Under 9, where you do your internal audits and your management reviews, you have performance evaluation. And under 10, you have act. So these are the prerequisite programs that are required to be implemented by every organization. We have part 1 for food manufacturing, part 2 for catering. So these are ISO TS standards. These are to be implemented alongside the 10 clauses. So they have specific requirements for specific, organizations in the food chain. So they are called the ISO TS, technical specifications. And we have part 1 to 6 and an extra requirement for food retail businesses. Okay, so talking about risk and hazard, I won't have time to elaborate on risk. However, risk, we've talked about risks earlier when we talked about clause 6.1, how that right, you need to know the food safety risks and take proactive measures to mitigate them. Okay, and then you need to evaluate the risk. Okay, so what are the risks that are associated with food safety? And I gave an example. I said resources could be a risk, lack of resources. So what is the probability that we will not have resources? What is the severity? If we don't have resources, how will it affect our business, right? And then you have to ensure that this risk is properly mitigated. Okay. HACCP, right? According to Codex Alimentarius, which is another organization, I won't have time to talk much about that. There are 12 steps to HACCP, and each of these steps you will find them in the standard. There are 12 steps to food safety and 7 HACCP principles. And in this slide, which I think will be shared later, I have tried to identify each of those 12 steps alongside their clauses, right? So each of the 12 steps, you'd find them in the standard, in the ISO 22000 standard. This just shows that basically what we're trying to say here is that HACCP is incorporated into ISO 22000. Some organizations, only implement HACCP if they think they're not ready for ISO 22000 and all that. But if you are ready if an organization is ready for ISO 22000, they would still be implementing HACCP. As a matter of fact, if you decide to implement any food safety standard at all, be it ISO 22000, FSSC, BRCGS, SQF, it doesn't matter. HACCP is always a basic principle. Okay, so of course, assemble the HACCP team. We talked about that in clause 5. Describe the products. We see that in clause 8. Identify intended use, clause 8. Construct your flow diagram, clause 8. Confirm flow diagram usually by the HACCP team. Also in clause 8, the 7 principles of HACCP. Of course, you have to do your proper hazard analysis, clause 8. You have to determine your CCPs, clause 8. You have to establish your critical limits, also in clause 8. You have to establish a monitoring system, also in clause 8. You have to establish corrective actions in clause 8 and verification clause 8. And of course, documentation clause 7. So validation, monitoring, verification, what's the difference? Validation means proof that it works. How do you show proof? Literature reviews, um, even the food safety team can decide to do validation, right? They can go through the system and see how well the processes are working, the system that we've put in place. Is it okay? So, for example, you have said, our chilling process will be 0 to 5, 0 to +5. There are a lot of scientific documents out there to show that products should be chilled at 0 to 5. If you're not satisfied with that, the food safety team can store products at 0 to 5, take it out for testing, right? To validate that, okay, 0 to 5 is actually working for the products. Monitoring, of course, after you validated your process, the next thing you do is to monitor. You need to ensure that you are actually storing your products at 0 to +5, as you have said, you will do your validation stage. And of course, verification. You need to verify that that system is working and that there is no other external factors that is affecting the system. Okay. Of course, CCP, OPRPs, PRP, I won't have time to explain this sadly. So CCP, a step in the process at which you try to control the process, usually the last step. So the basic features of a CCP is it should be the last point of the process where you can, where you can manage that hazard. Okay, and then it should be measurable. That is why most times CCPs, temperature, time, pH, most times CCPs have a numerical value attached to it. And of course, we have OPRPs. These are extra control measures that you use to minimize risk. For example, during your receiving, because you are not 100% in charge of the product, you want to ensure that whatever products you're bringing to your system, you want to ensure that they are okay. So you put in certain action criteria that you use to check that those raw materials, they are good during receiving, because you didn't produce them, right? But you can control them at the point of receiving. Okay, and then of course PRPs, which are general programs that most people are familiar with: your personal hygiene, waste management, pest control. If you want to understand how to properly implement a PRP, check the ISO-TS, the ones peculiar to your industry. So of course, if you're into food manufacturing, you're going to part 1. If you're into catering, part 2. If you're into storage and distribution, part 5. And so on and so forth. It gives specific requirements. So when we say, oh, don't, as a consultant, for example, if I say, oh, don't use wood in your facility, there's a reason why I'm saying that. Check your PRP. If I say, oh, your lights must be shatterproof, right? Check the PRPs, check the TS to give you proper guidelines on the PRPs. So how do you implement? The first thing is ensure that you know why you want to implement ISO 22000. Go to the scope of the standard and be sure that the standard is for you. I'm talking about clause 1. Go to clause 1 and be sure the standard is for you. Number 2, understand the standard and its requirements in the context of your position. So these standards, everybody can apply ISO 22000. So you must look for a way to apply it to your own process. How can I apply it to agriculture, agri-products? How can I apply it to catering? How can I apply it to cassava starch processing? Look for how to apply this generic standard into your own process. Ensure that the food safety team is a food safety team. It's not just paperwork. Yes, your food safety team, you said that, oh, maintenance is there, procurement is there, but when you're taking food safety decision, no, maintenance is not involved, procurement is not involved, right? Food safety team must be active and it must not just be a paper thing. Okay, get your prerequisites right. Of course, prerequisites, if you're going to university, what are the prerequisites? You must ensure that you have WAEC. You cannot talk about ASIP when your prerequisites are not right. That's why it's called prerequisites. It is a prerequisite to food safety. If it is not right, your ASIP is definitely going to fail. So don't jump to ASIP, get your prerequisite right? Ensure you do PDCA. That is your tool for continual improvement. Ensure that you're properly planning, you're checking every time, and that you're acting on the non-conformities that you may highlight during your checks. Okay, do a proper thorough gap analysis. Check what the standard wants and what you want, and be sure that you're able to cover that. Ensure that your documentation aligns with your process. I have talked about that a lot already. And of course, you can seek the services of a consultant like me, right? So a consultant can help you properly align your processes to this standard in case it is overwhelming, right? Okay. And so food safety and other standards, I mentioned it earlier, HACCP is the bedrock of all food safety standards, right? That is one common thing all the standards have. However, they have, of course, slight differences. For example, FSSC, for example, is very huge on food loss and food waste, which you will not see in ISO 22000. FSSC is huge on food safety, food quality or culture, which you will not see in ISO 22000. ISO 22000 does not have explicit requirements on how to conduct threat assessment and vulnerability assessment for food fraud and food defense. You find that in FSSC, right? And FSSC comprises of ISO 22000, the ISO CS series, and FSSC additional requirements, right? So conforming to ISO 22000 is not enough, right? You must ensure that you comply with NAFDAC. So in all these things we've said, if you do not conform to NAFDAC, you are even also failing in ISO 22000. So whatever NAFDAC says, you must also comply. So for example, NAFDAC has told us you must do food handlers tests 2 times in a year. You cannot wake up and say, no, ISO 22000 did not say how many times I must do food and last test. You say, okay, I'm going to do my own once. No, that doesn't work, right? You must follow NAFDAC regulations, SOM regulations, and other government regulations that apply to your business. Thank you very much for having me. I know time is fast spent, but I hope we're able to understand all the things I said, which I said quite. No, I said quite a lot of things, but thank you very much. Yeah.
Standards and best practice, your partner in professional development.